A 1,000-kilometer fault line off the coast of North America is locked. It is stuck. And because of this, the entire western edge of Vancouver Island is being silently compressed, bulging upwards at a rate of 3 millimeters a year. When it finally unlocks, hundreds of thousands of residents and tourists will be in a place where the ground itself will instantly drop by 2 meters. Most of them have never heard the term elastic rebound subsidence, and that sudden drop is only the beginning of the problem. It is the preamble to the real event. What do you think is the biggest unknown in this scenario? The earthquake, the land drop, or the wave that comes after? Let us know in the comments below. If you find this level of detail valuable, the kind you won't get from a headline, consider subscribing. It is a small click, but it is genuinely the only way channels like ours dedicated to deep dive investigations can continue to exist. A huge number of people tell us they love these videos but simply forget to subscribe. Please don't be one of them. Your support is critical for us to keep making this content. Okay, let's begin. The mechanism is deceptively simple. For centuries, a tectonic plate called the Juan de Fuca has been sliding beneath the North American continent. But right now, along a 620-mile front stretching from Northern California to British Columbia, the plates are not sliding. They are stuck. The energy that should be releasing in small, regular earthquakes is instead accumulating. It is building up as strain, year after year, decade after decade. This is the Cascadia subduction zone. And Vancouver Island sits on the leading edge. Picture the island as a giant, geological spring being compressed from the west. The western coast, a rugged line of rainforest and rock facing the open Pacific, is being squeezed against the hard backstop of the mainland. This compression forces the land upward, 2 to 3 millimeters a year, the height of 2 stacked dimes every 12 months. It is an imperceptible rise, a slow inhalation of the Earth's crust, happening right now. GPS sensors confirm it. The entire western half of the island is bulging. But a spring can only be compressed for so long. Eventually, the friction between the two plates will be overcome by the accumulated strain. The lock will break. In that moment, the North American plate will snap back. Not over days, not over hours, in minutes. The land that has been slowly rising for centuries will violently rebound westward and, critically, downward. The scientific term is subsidence. The west coast of Vancouver Island will instantly drop, not by inches, by up to 2 meters, 6.5 feet. This is not a slow sinking. It is a sudden, physical drop in elevation, an elevator with its cables cut, and it happens just minutes before the tsunami arrives. A tsunami generated by that same snap, that same violent displacement of the seafloor. The land drops into the ocean, and then the ocean is thrown onto the land. The timeline is what is terrifying. For decades, Western geologists did not believe the Pacific Northwest was capable of this kind of event. They saw the subduction zone on maps, but they believed it was sliding smoothly, innocuously. The evidence of its violent past was buried. It was written in a language they had not yet learned to read. That changed in 1994. Two Canadian geologists, Peter Bobrowski of the Geological Survey of Canada and John Clegg of Simon Fraser University, were digging in the coastal marshes of Vancouver Island. They were looking for evidence of sea level change. What they found was something else entirely. They found a story told in layers of mud and sand. Core samples revealed a repeating unnatural pattern, a thick layer of black organic marsh soil full of plant roots. Then, laid directly on top, a clean, sharp sheet of gray sand, like a beach had been instantly deposited in the middle of a swamp, and on top of that sand, another layer of marsh soil. This pattern repeated down through centuries of sediment. Soil, sand. Soil, sand. The sand layers were out of place. They were tsunami deposits, but the smoking gun was the soil beneath the sand. The plant fossils in that soil showed it was a terrestrial freshwater marsh. The soil on top of the sand was a saltwater, tidal marsh. The only way for that to happen is for the land itself to have suddenly and catastrophically dropped in elevation, plunging the freshwater marsh below the high tide line, killing it instantly. The mud was telling them the land had dropped. The sand was telling them a great wave had followed. John Clegg and Peter Bobrowski had found physical proof of the great drop. They had found the geological signature of a magnitude 9 earthquake. And it was not a one-time event. They found evidence of multiple megathrust quakes and tsunamis, each one burying the previous coastline. The average time between these events, roughly 500 to 600 years. The last one was in the year 1700. It's almost chilling when you consider that a story written in layers of mud was already known for generations by the people who lived on that coast. When geologists later spoke with elders of the Hu-ai-at First Nations, they heard the oral histories. They heard the story passed down from the survivors of that exact night. What are your thoughts on this intersection, where ancient stories preserved through generations provide the key to unlocking a modern scientific mystery? Drop a comment below. It's a fascinating part of this story. The Hu-ai-at had a large village at a place called Anakla, in a place we now call Pachena Bay. According to the histories recorded by elders like Chief Louis Nookmis, on a winter night the earth shook so violently that people could not stand. And then something impossible happened. The land beneath their longhouses turned to liquid. The ground gave way, and the village, built on a sand spit, began to sink. Then, from the darkness, a wall of water taller than the trees swept in. Anakla was erased. An entire community, more than 600 people, gone. The Hu-ai-at story speaks of only one location surviving, the village of Malthsit, which was deliberately built on high ground, 23 meters or 75 feet above the sea. Everyone else was lost. The survival rate at Anakla was 1 out of more than 600. The wave, estimated by modern scientists to have been at least 15 meters, or 50 feet high, did not just destroy the village, it scoured the coastline. And it did not stop there. This is where the story becomes a global detective case. 9 hours later, on January 27, 1700, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, the coast of Japan was struck by a tsunami. It wasn't enormous by Japanese standards, but it was big enough to cause damage in coastal towns and be recorded in civic and mercantile logs. But there was a profound mystery. No one in Japan had felt an earthquake. Normally, a tsunami was preceded by violent shaking. This one arrived without a parent. For 3 centuries, it was known in Japanese records as the orphan tsunami. The mystery was only solved in the late 20th century, when scientists put the pieces together. The sand layers under Vancouver Island. The drowned ghost forests of dead cedar trees all along the coast from British Columbia to Oregon, killed when the land dropped into salt water. The oral histories of the Hu-ai-at, and the samurai records from Japan. They all pointed to a single event, on the evening of January 26, 1700. At roughly 9 p.m. Pacific time, the entire 1,000-kilometer length of the Cascadia subduction zone had ruptured in a magnitude 9.0 earthquake. The wave it generated had crossed an ocean. The date and time were no longer an estimate. They were a certainty. The clock had been reset in 1700. It has been ticking ever since. For a long time, this threat felt distant, historical. But we have had modern warnings, previews of the forces at play. On Good Friday, March 27th, 1964, a magnitude 9.2 earthquake struck Anchorage, Alaska. It was not a Cascadia event, but it was the same type of plate boundary quake. It generated a powerful tsunami that radiated across the Pacific. It reached the west coast of Vancouver Island just hours later, and here is where a deadly lesson was learned about coastal geography. You would assume the safest place would be tucked away from the open ocean, deep inside a protective inlet. The city of Port Alberni thought it was safe. It sits at the head of the Alberni Inlet, a long, narrow fjord that cuts 40 kilometers deep into the island. But that inlet did not protect the city. It doomed it. The geography acted as a funnel. As the tsunami wave entered the mouth of the inlet, the narrowing channel squeezed the water, forcing it higher and faster. By the time it reached Port Alberni, the wave had grown to 4.3 meters, or 14 feet. It came in a series of surges. It tossed cars, smashed buildings, and ripped homes from their foundations. 262 homes were damaged. 60 were destroyed. It was a miracle no one was killed. The Port Alberni disaster was a wake-up call. It proved that a tsunami is not just a beach problem. It's an inlet problem. The unique fjord-like geography of Vancouver Island's coast, with its intricate network of inlets, creates dozens of these potential funnels, amplifying a wave's destructive power far inland. If you know anyone who lives on or visits the Pacific Northwest coast, this is information they need to have. The shaking is the only warning. Please share this video with them. A simple share, or even just hitting the like button to help the algorithm, can spread critical awareness and start important conversations. This brings us to the present day, to a town that embodies both the beauty and the terrifying vulnerability of this coastline. Tofino, British Columbia. Tofino is a world-renowned destination, a magnet for surfers, hikers, and tourists seeking the wild Pacific coast. In the summer, its population swells filling the hotels, campgrounds, and RV parks that line its spectacular, low-lying beaches. And that is the heart of the problem. In June of 2026, a catastrophic risk assessment was published by Katsuichiro Goda, an associate professor at Western University and Canada's research chair in multi-hazard risk assessment. His team modeled in painstaking detail what would happen to Tofino during a full-margin Cascadia event. The results were grim. Goda himself stated the obvious vulnerability. The majority of the campgrounds, the resort hotels, etc., are all situated in the low-lying area. So that raises the risk level in Tofino. The study calculated that a major tsunami could cause hundreds of deaths and over $1 billion in losses, in Tofino alone. The models show a wave that could reach the height of a 5-story building, arriving just 15 to 20 minutes after the shaking stops. Picture this. It's a warm evening in August. A family from Alberta is in their RV at a beachfront campground just south of Tofino. The sun has just set. They feel a slight rumble, like a large truck passing by. Then it doesn't stop. The rumble grows into a violent roar. The RV is shaking so hard they can't stand. After 2, maybe 3 minutes of pure terror, it stops. The power is out. Cell service is gone. Their first instinct is to check for damage. But the shaking is the warning. It is the only siren they will get. They have at best 20 minutes to get themselves and their children to high ground. But what is high ground? Where is it? The road is likely buckled. And critically, the land they are on has just dropped by 1.5 meters. The ocean is already beginning to rush in, flooding the exit road long before the main wave even appears on the horizon. This scenario, the tourist trap, is a major focus for emergency planners. How do you evacuate thousands of visitors who don't know the local plan, who don't know that the earthquake itself is the signal to run, not to tweet? How do you do it in 15 minutes, in the dark, on roads that may no longer exist? This is the kind of analysis we are committed to. If you're finding this information valuable and you haven't subscribed, I'll just pause for a second. Now is a great time to do it. It helps our channel immensely and ensures you won't miss the next investigation. Thank you. Let's continue. For years, the problem was understood to be the sequence: a locked fault, building strain, a massive earthquake, subsidence, and then a tsunami. A terrifying but linear chain of events. But that is only half the problem. The real story has a new chapter, a detail buried not in mud, but in gigs of seismic data that changes the entire calculation. It suggests the system is not just locked and loaded, it is now actively tearing itself apart. In September of 2025, a study published in the journal Science Advances sent a shockwave through the geologic community. The lead author was Brandon Shuck, an assistant professor of geology and geophysics at Louisiana State University. His team used a technology called seismic reflection imaging. Think of it as a geological ultrasound, sending sound waves deep into the Earth's crust and reading the echoes to build a picture of what lies beneath. They were looking at the northernmost section of the Cascadia subduction zone, just off the coast of Vancouver Island. What they saw was stunning: the Juan de Fuca plate. The small oceanic plate that's being forced under North America is not a single, coherent slab. It's broken. A fragment of it, a microplate called the Explorer plate, is behaving in a bizarre and alarming way. It is not just subducting, it is tearing away. There is a rip, a literal hole being torn in the fabric of the tectonic plate, right at the boundary. Brandon Shuck described the process with a powerful analogy. Getting a subduction zone started is like trying to push a train uphill. It takes a huge effort. But once it's moving, it's like the train is racing downhill. Impossible to stop. Ending it requires something dramatic. Basically, a train wreck. The data shows that train wreck is happening now, 100 kilometers offshore. The Explorer plate is being pulled and twisted by the larger Pacific plate to the west and the North American plate to the east. This immense tension is causing the plate to fail, to fracture. They captured real-time evidence of the subduction zone actively tearing itself apart. This discovery fundamentally changes the models. Geologists previously assumed the rupture would start at one end of the fault and unzip along its length. But what if it doesn't? What if this tier, this point of extreme weakness off Vancouver Island's coast, acts as a new initiation point? What if it allows the stress to build in new, unpredictable ways? The northern segment of the Cascadia fault was thought to be less continuously locked than the southern part. This new data suggests the situation is far more complex, and potentially more unstable. It doesn't reduce the risk, it adds a terrifying new dimension of uncertainty. And that brings us to the central contradiction, the detail that connects all the pieces. The official advice in a tsunami zone is simple and correct. When you feel the shaking, get to high ground. But what happens when the very concept of high ground is compromised from the first second? A major collaborative study in May 2025, involving the United States Geological Survey, drove this point home. The study wasn't about the tsunami wave itself. It was about the immediate permanent change to the land caused by the subsidence. Their models showed that the instantaneous drop of 0.5 to 2 meters will permanently alter the floodplain. Low-lying coastal areas will become part of the intertidal zone in an instant. Roads that were 10 feet above sea level will suddenly be 5 feet above sea level, or less. This subsidence doesn't just make the subsequent tsunami worse. It creates its own near-instantaneous flood risk. Seawater will passively inundate the newly lowered land. Escape routes could be cut off by this initial flooding before the main tsunami wave even forms. The land drops, the sea rushes in to fill the new space, and then the 50-foot wall of water arrives. I know, it's the third time, but the data on our channel shows our subscribe rate is low. And as we've established, the data doesn't lie. If you've watched this far, the value is clearly here. Please, take 1 second and hit the subscribe button. It's the only way we can compete with less researched content. It's incredibly important. Thank you. What happens next is the part nobody can answer. The decades of accumulated strain could continue to build for another century, or another decade, or it could release next Tuesday. Shuck's discovery of the tearing plate adds a joker to the deck. It could change how the fault ruptures, where it ruptures, and what kind of shaking it produces at the surface. The 1700 event was a full margin rupture. Will the next one be the same? Or will it be a series of partial ruptures, each devastating in its own right? The questions stack up. Why now? Why is the tectonic plate tearing apart at this specific point in geologic time? And how does that tear affect the strain buildup on the locked section just to the south? If the land on the west coast drops by 6 feet in 2 minutes, what does high ground mean for a person standing on a beach? How far inland is safe when your starting elevation is suddenly below sea level? How do you plan an evacuation when the roads themselves are the first victims, not of the tsunami but of the land's initial collapse? The danger facing Vancouver Island is not a single simple threat. It is a cascade failure. The ground is being squeezed like a spring. It is tearing apart at its northern edge. When it let goes, the land itself will fall away, and the ocean will follow. And right now, on a quiet hillside on the west coast of Vancouver Island, a GPS antenna is cemented into the bedrock. It is talking to a satellite 20,000 kilometers overhead. And today, it will record that the ground it sits on is a tiny fraction of a millimeter higher and a tiny fraction of a millimeter closer to the mainland than it was yesterday. The spring is still being compressed. The fault is still locked. And the coast is still silently breathing in.